Davis. And I will turn our interview over to our two esteemed journalism Crown and Shield students, Hailey, Morey, and Bahal.
Today we welcome Woman of Impact honoree Belva Davis to the Notre Dame community as an honored guest and esteemed role model. Ms. Davis, an alumna of Berkeley High School, has been a pioneer of the California and national news scene since the 1950s as a broadcast journalist and anchor. She has overcome obstacles of both sexism and racism in her long and prolific career. With no shortage of accomplishments and honors, her new book, Never in My Wildest Dreams, preaches accolades from a number of famous household names. She's been honored with 8 local Emmys and a number of Lifetime Achievement Awards, including honors from the International Women's Media Foundation, the National Association of Black Journalists, and the Northern California chapter of the National Association of Television Arts and Science. She has interviewed and reported on some of the most iconic and historic events, movements, and people in the past half-century. It is a great honor to have her here with us today. Please welcome celebrated journalist and our newest woman of impact, Belva Davis.
Welcome to Notre Dame, Ms. Davis. You have interviewed a number of people over your celebrated career. How does it feel to be the one interviewed today?
Not very comfortable. I know I'm at Notre Dame, and I never, this school has a reputation for cultivating leadership, so I hope you're not out to start making a reputation for me. No gotcha questions.
So, we'd like to talk about your career and yourself and a lot of different things today. So, one question we have is, when did you really start believing yourself and seeing yourself as a bona fide journalist?
Many years into my career. That's the way it is, and whatever you choose, if you are the first to do something, you know you're writing the history of whatever that is as you're doing it. And since you don't have a lead or a solid model to follow as to what it is you bring to the table that's different from what has been there before, it takes a while to give value to the history that you're creating without feeling egotistical about it. So it took me a while to learn that things are done a certain way, but it's all right if you come from a different viewpoint to build a new model. And that's how I started thinking about the work that I was building a new model. Once I was comfortable with that, then I could feel that I created another niche in the history of women in journalism.
So speaking about the women in journalism, how have you seen that change over the past few years since your career started?
Well, let's go back farther than the past few years. I can only tell you, you said that I've been involved in journalism since the 50s. I saw a couple of faces down there going, oh, my mom wasn't even here then. But there was a time when women in journalism faced so many obstacles and so many challenges in trying to lead. I have a good friend who's part of a suit filed by women from Newsweek magazine to get a title other than as secretary or copy girl or whatever have you. We just weren't thought of as real journalists. And so first we had to convince the guys that we could do their jobs. And you can imagine there aren't many people who want to have a whole, new group of people fighting for the few jobs that there are. So it was hard to break in. When I came to the television station, we had a program called the Noon News, which we still do. I was at KPIX Channel 5 television. And the prime spot was for the woman who did the Noon News, who did the garden shows, the fashion shows, and that, and then did some lead-ins. So our biggest job was to convince the people who ran the business, with all males, that we could do any job that anybody else on their staff could do it. So it's a world of difference between women who are in Egypt, in Africa, in the hot spots of the world, covering the toughest stories in the world. In fact, it's sort of the way it was when I first came in. They gave us all the tough jobs just to see how far and how long we could last. And when you consider that when I was hired, the television news cameraman had a lottery as to whether I'd last 1 week or 2 weeks. And I've lasted 50 years, and most of them are gone. So there's been much change. I mean, women do everything in business today. They lead in this business every day. I mean, it's, you know, getting on Huffington Post. These women who are iconic in the world that they created as to the level of, I guess, richness, I call it that, not guys, but maybe, that they brought to the whole field of journalism.
Do you feel like those initial experiences in the journalism field really shaped your career later on?
Well, of course they did, but I'm trying to separate out my two worlds of journalism. I started in journalism when color counted heavily. The industries were divided solely on the line of color for African Americans anyway. So when I started, I could only work for a black newspaper. I could only speak on a radio station that was programmed for a black audience. I could only write for a newspaper that was dedicated to incidents in my community. So that was one world. It was a friendly world. It was a newspaper environment that had a point of view. The industry itself had a point of view, and that was informing people about who we were, people of color, up from slavery, now doing all kinds of things. And a lot of it was to boost our confidence in our ability to do things. And then I entered the other world, the big pool, by going into the competitiveness with people. By now, I think it's because the activism of the 50s and 60s, blacks were the first ones let in the door. Women, after we got through with the color, then women and gender came next. And I helped found a program at Channel 5 in the early 70s. That was the first interracial primetime hosted program, one of the first in the country. So I've been at the door and helping to open it in many of the barriers that were up there for women and for color. And now we don't think about it very much, which is great. I think it's great that the program I hosted for many years will have a woman who will continue as the host. And you know, and you might, even for you younger people here, might know what a difficulty that the women, Barbara Walters and Katie Couric, these women had in trying to fill the role of the nightly news primetime anchor. So it isn't as though the battle is over. We're certainly past midway, but constantly women are having to continue to prove themselves. And that's why I think we have people wandering around in some of the toughest areas of coverage in the world.
You said that you had to break barriers in both women and being a person of color. Do you think, or like, what was the biggest, proudest moment in your career?
Well, I can't say it was the proudest moment, but it was the first time that I felt part of the team when I won my first Emmy. And it was for an unusual story. And it was built upon a relationship that was very unusual. The interview was with a prisoner on death row. And he'd been in prison for 47 years. And I'd been covering some stories at San Quentin, and I met the warden. And this guy had gone to jail for stealing a suit of clothes. And he'd been involved in some kind of incident. Bottom line, before Redfay was leaving his job, he thought this guy's story should be told. So I landed an interview that was unusual even at that time for any reporter to get. He was off death row. We were able to do the interview. It was a story that became internationally popular. He ended up finally, because of the movements, getting paroled and spent his last days free, but not happy. He'd spent more than half of his life behind bars, and he used to call me. He said, it's too many decisions. You have to decide too many things. He wasn't used to making decisions for himself. So anyway, back to that. So it was winning an Emmy for that unusual story, not a girly story, nothing wrong with that, but one that the guys hadn't been able to deliver on. So I was very, very proud of that.
That's incredible to hear the stories that you have, considering that. Something that you've been present for so many of those stories. Is there a story you have a particular attachment to besides that one? Any particular issue that was really close to your heart as you moved through journalism and broadcasting?
Very long career, so I can't say I can answer that honestly, because it's whatever pops into my head at this moment. And when you get to this point in life, you never know whether there's anything that's going to pop into your head. Something will. But I've just been very fortunate to interview so many wonderful people. And I think when I feel I've done something special is if I talk to a person who's been, hard to get, and you get a note of thanks from them. That's very rewarding, especially if it wasn't a story, PR story about them. And I think the first George Bush, did an interview with President Bush in San Francisco. I've never done an Oval Office interview in my life, but I've talked to many presidents. And after we finished talking, we said, just chat. And I later got a photograph, autograph, and a note. And so that was absolutely terrific to do. On the other side of the aisle, had a chance to spend some private time with Robert Kennedy, and shortly before he was murdered. And so it became a signal. So I think it's the stories I feel good about is where I think I've talked to a person who, by their contact with me, says that I met them as a person, not just the celebrity name, that we had touched bases as human beings.
So since you started in journalism, what do you think the biggest change has been since then?
Well, technology has changed it totally. I could never go into a class and tell anybody how to put together a story today. It's a different world, different instruments. The only thing that they have not figured out how to do yet is to create the words and the feeling and the emotion that it takes for a story to live with you. Somebody has to do that. So far, anyway, that's been left to us humans. And I always say to people who are interested in determined to get into journalism, that I think you have to have two things in life, because I don't think they can create those: curiosity and passion. If you have curiosity, that means you want to know about your world. And if you have passion, it means you're going to devote the time, whatever you're reporting on needs to it, to have done, to be a real news story.
Where did your passion for journalism start from? Why did you get into that field?
I have two start points. First one was just, I love people, I'm curious a lot, and so therefore I made it number one, because it became my ticket to a life that I couldn't have envisioned. And so that was what got me into the black press. And it was a matter, I loved the philosophy behind it, and was to create the human spirit, the human image of people whose skins happen to be black, and to find as many connecting points with them and other people of the world. So that was there. Then there was the other world, the major markets, getting into, quote unquote, the white media. Being seasoned enough from what I learned in a segregated society to take something positive from that. I learned the instruments of the business of, how to write headlines and all of those things. So when I got to my new job, I bought a curiosity maybe that, you know, if you are working on the Marin Journal or something and you grew up in Marin, that you know all about that. I bought it, and I said that because so many of my people in my newsroom were all from Marin. But I bought a curiosity to it because I didn't understand the language of what they were doing. I grew up in a very poor Southern family, and I remember being invited to my first Marin house party with an associate, and they served quiche. I had never had a quiche in my life. I didn't even know when they said it was a quiche party. I had to go look it up. But then there were things I thought about that came from Louisiana that they didn't know either. So it was integrating myself into that world of journalism, realizing the value of the standards that had been set about sourcing material, knowing that just because I knew somebody who might have known something about it wasn't enough. I had to find the experts, or those whose words anyway were treasured as being contributing to the honest portrayal of whatever the situation. So I had two learning curves. And I don't know what the one is going to be in front of people here like you today, because you have to become technological geniuses. You have to be able to separate blog thoughts from real facts. And it's hard sometimes to know where the personal stops and the real story begins with the way we gather news today.
I can see journalism kind of moving in that direction. Does it sadden you? Does it make you happy to see that it's becoming, more integrated into the technology, or is it sad to see that it's kind of moving away from traditional newspapers?
I don't think the instruments are bad. What I think is if it causes us to be, if things come too easy and it wipes out our ability to want to know, then it's up to teachers like those here. We're going to have to teach you all to operate by different standards than those that I operated by. My husband and I used to get, my husband Bill Morey down here was television news photographer. But we used to, yeah, you can stand up. We used to get 5 newspapers and clip them and trade the clips. Now you go to Google, you don't have to look for anything. We had so many wonderful conversations from the hunt, looking for the facts. And so now, that's a totally different thing. So the business is so different in the way you gather it. In the olden days, no one would even expect you to take pictures and then concentrate on the story at the same time and feel that the best effort had been given. Now you have to blog, tweet, photograph, write, all at the same time, and the day's no longer than it was when I was just writing.
So today's journalism has really changed in dynamic, but just pulling back to the journalism you started with broadcast journalism in writing, what was really, what's my question? So I really want to talk about kind of the people you've interviewed. We talked about how you had an involvement in presidential interviews and all these different aspects. You were interviewing and broadcasting at a time where there was a lot of historic movements and people that were very significant to today's U.S. history. What do you think was the most significant thing you were able to report on, other than just the presidential and everything? Was there a particular movement that you really reported on that gained national attention? Or just attention?
So I got to separate that out. Let's go back and let's see if we can take it in pieces, because what you ask is very, very interesting. People other than celebrities that I interview,
perhaps
or
people.
just the texture. One of the things that I brought to the table was an interest in women's news events, past social, gardening and all of that. And some of my earliest stories had to do with the struggle to make breast cancer an issue that women should know about and care about. So I did some of the earliest stories on monography and what it meant. And one of the first walls that I ran into I was working with the first woman who was editing film back then in the newsroom, and we both knew about this big problem. And so we wanted to do a series about it. And one of the things was to show a woman how to examine her breast. And we wanted to put that on the air. We did not ask if we could put on without clothing. We put a leotard on her, but she had to touch her body to show her what she should do. And the guys saw it, and they went nuts. And they said, "You can't do that." We said, "We can do this. This is a health story." And so anyway, we had a big fight all the way up to the Westinghouse headquarters in New York as to whether we could show a woman in leotard touching her body. And that was so ridiculous that we both became feminists. So that was one challenge, was introducing that kind of views and talking about the complexities of trying to be a mom and trying to move ahead in a competitive world. We did those kinds of stories. I had a great interest in health, and that was before health was the story that it is today. It was a background story, so to speak. And so that led me into the world of research and science, and I got to meet people like Linus Pauling and to do interviews when people were not knocking down their doors to do that. They were happy to see me. So anyway, I was able to introduce some topics that they had not already worn through for television now, not newspapers, this has been television. And so that was very, very gratifying. And later on, the people who needed attention from television to be considered real, and that was the protesters over various movements. And that included the civil rights movement, so that gave me access to Martin Luther King and so forth, but also to some of the women leaders who, at that time, when I tried to point out, they were the engine behind the guys out front, but they were getting none of the credit. So when I wrote my book, I just said the Black Panther Party would have been nothing without the women who were the brain power behind these guys who marched around.
There would be nothing without you reporting. It's amazing that you have all these opportunities you had those opportunities to really, gain awareness for all these different people and advocate for them. It's incredible.
So you obviously talked about your struggles and your time as a journalist and persevered through. And if you could convey one singular message before you left today, what do you think it would be?
Oh my God.
Daunting question.
Daunting question. But that the answer is rhetorical. If you, no matter whether you're interested in journalism or not, whatever you choose as the field where you're going to devote most of your wake hours, and that is the job that you're going to be doing during the day. And I assume now we don't doubt that most women will work at some point in their life. So, it's to carry those two things that I told you and to use them as the measurement by whether you need to be walking that path. I mean, you can't go into a job that you don't really care about or want to know more about, or think everything's been done that can be done in that field and there's no room for you to contribute. You've got to see yourself as contributing. And that leads into what I'll talk about most, what I talk about in life, is dreams. I think everything starts with the vision that you set in your mind about what you can do. If you can't envision yourself doing it, more than likely you won't do it. So women had to be taught. They could imagine themselves anything, because anything was what was out there for them. So that's sort of the round circle that's made me whatever I've turned out to be. And that is trying to, even at this period of my life, and I say it with hesitation because women used to never own up to how long they've been on this earth. We all cheated, even if it was only a year. I'm not sure why we did things like that. But even as I face my 80s, I am so curious about most things because the world continues to change. Whatever you knew it to be, it's not going to be that. Maybe even later today.